The storm had been building for 3 days. By the time it broke, the Kalahari was drowning. Rivers that hadn't existed in decades carved through the red sand. Lightning split the sky every few seconds. The wind screamed so loud that nothing else could be heard. Ethan Cole huddled inside his research shelter, a small metal structure barely bigger than a garden shed, bolted to a concrete foundation in the middle of nowhere. He was 31 years old, a wildlife biologist from Texas studying meerkats, alone at this outpost for the past 7 weeks. The shelter had been designed for sun, not flood. Water was seeping under the door. The generator had died an hour ago. His satellite phone showed no signal. His vehicle was parked 200 meters away, but the ground between here and there had become a river of mud. He was trapped. And then he heard it. A sound that cut through the storm, high-pitched, desperate, coming from somewhere outside. Ethan pressed his face against the small window, trying to see through the rain. Lightning flashed, and he saw something impossible. A white shape, barely visible in the chaos, struggling in the mud 30 meters from his shelter. Small, moving, crying out with each flash of lightning. An animal, a baby, drowning. Ethan didn't think. He grabbed his flashlight, unlocked the shelter door, and stepped into hell. The wind nearly knocked him down. The rain hit his skin like needles. The mud sucked at his boots with every step, trying to pull him under. But he kept moving toward the white shape. It took him 4 minutes to cover 30 meters. By the time he reached the animal, he was soaked to the bone, shaking from cold, barely able to see through the water streaming down his face. He pointed his flashlight downward, and his heart stopped. It was a lion cub. But not just any cub. This one was white, pure white, with pale blue eyes that reflected his flashlight beam like mirrors. A leucistic lion, one of the rarest animals on Earth. Maybe 1 in 10,000 births produces a white lion. The cub was stuck in a mud hole, sinking deeper with every struggle. The water was up to its chest. Its small paws scrambled uselessly against the slick walls of the hole. It was maybe 8 weeks old. Alone, dying. Ethan knew what he should do. He should go back to his shelter, lock the door, wait out the storm. This was nature. Cubs died all the time. A white cub, separated from its mother in a flood? It was already dead. He would only be risking his own life for nothing. That's what the rational part of his brain said. But the cub looked at him. Those pale blue eyes, filled with terror, locked onto his face. And Ethan reached into the mud. The cub bit him. Of course it did. It was a wild animal, terrified, and a strange creature was grabbing it. Its small teeth sank into Ethan's hand, drawing blood that immediately washed away in the rain. Ethan didn't let go. He pulled the cub free with a wet, sucking sound, cradled it against his chest, and turned back toward the shelter. The return journey was worse. He was carrying extra weight now, fighting the wind, barely able to see. Twice he fell, nearly losing the cub in the mud. Twice he got back up. When he finally reached the shelter and slammed the door behind him, he collapsed on the floor, gasping, shaking, the white cub still clutched against his chest. The cub was shivering violently. Its white fur was brown with mud, its small body cold as ice. Ethan stripped off his wet shirt, wrapped the cub in a dry blanket from his cot, and held it against his bare skin, using his own body heat to warm the tiny animal. For 2 hours, he sat in the dark, holding a lion cub, listening to the storm rage outside. The cub stopped shivering around midnight. Its breathing steadied. It pressed closer against Ethan's chest, seeking warmth, and made a sound he had never heard before, a soft, rumbling purr. Ethan closed his eyes. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're okay. I've got you." He didn't know that something else was out in the storm, something that had been searching for this cub since the flood began, something that had just caught the scent of her missing child coming from inside a human shelter. The lioness arrived at dawn. Her name was never recorded. She was wild, untagged, unknown to researchers. But she was magnificent. A full-grown female in her prime, tawny coat darkened by rain, muscles rippling beneath her skin. She had been searching for her cub for 12 hours, through the storm, through the flood, through terrain that would have killed most animals. She had followed the scent across 3 kilometers of devastated landscape, losing it in the water, finding it again on higher ground, never stopping, never resting. Now that scent led to a small metal structure, and inside that structure she could smell 2 things, her cub and a human. Ethan woke to a sound that turned his blood to ice, a low, rumbling growl, coming from directly outside his door. He sat up slowly, the cub still sleeping against his chest. Through the small window, in the gray light of early morning, he saw her. A lioness, full-grown, standing 3 meters from his shelter, staring directly at the door. Her lips were pulled back, showing teeth as long as his fingers. Her eyes were fixed on the shelter with an intensity that left no room for interpretation. She knew her cub was inside, and she was going to get it back. The shelter was not designed to withstand a lion. The walls were thin metal. The door was secured with a simple latch. The windows were single-pane glass that would shatter with one swipe of a paw. Ethan had no weapons, no phone signal, no way to call for help. And a lioness was circling his shelter, looking for a way in. He could hear her moving, the soft pad of paws on wet ground, the occasional scrape of claws against metal as she tested the walls, the rumbling growl that never fully stopped. The cub woke up. It heard its mother's voice, that low, vibrating call that lionesses use with their young, and immediately began crying in response, high-pitched mews that echoed in the small space. The lioness went silent. Then she hit the door. The entire shelter shook. The latch held, but barely. Ethan saw the metal bend inward, saw daylight appear at the edges where the frame had warped. She hit it again, and again. Each impact drove Ethan further back until he was pressed against the far wall, holding the crying cub, watching the door slowly give way. He had maybe 2 minutes before she broke through. 2 minutes to figure out how to not die. Ethan looked at the cub in his arms. Those pale blue eyes looked back at him, still trusting, still calm, not understanding that its mother was about to kill the creature who had saved its life. Ethan had a choice. He could keep holding the cub, use it as a shield. A lioness wouldn't attack if he was holding her baby, probably. Maybe. He didn't know. He had studied meerkats, not lions. Or he could do the only thing that made sense. He could give the cub back. The door buckled again. The latch was failing. He could see the lioness's face now through the gap, her eyes, her teeth, her fury. Ethan made his decision. He walked toward the door. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to protect himself. But he kept walking. The cub held gently in his arms until he was standing directly in front of the failing door. "I know you can hear me," he said, his voice shaking. "I know you can smell your baby. I'm going to open this door. I'm going to give her back to you. Please, please don't kill me." The lioness went silent. Ethan reached for the latch. His hand was trembling so badly he could barely grip the metal. He closed his eyes, and he opened the door. The lioness didn't move. She stood 3 feet from the open doorway, her body coiled to strike, her eyes locked on Ethan. He stepped forward slowly, the cub cradled against his chest. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. He was outside now, in the open. Nothing between him and a predator that could kill him in seconds. Ethan knelt down. He placed the cub gently on the wet ground between himself and its mother. Then he stayed there, on his knees, head bowed, waiting. The cub didn't understand what was happening. It looked back at Ethan, confused, then looked at its mother. It mewed, that same small, desperate sound it had made in the mud hole. The lioness moved. She stepped forward, past her cub, until she was standing directly over Ethan's kneeling form. He could feel her breath on the back of his neck, hot, heavy, carrying the scent of something wild and terrifying. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't look up. The lioness lowered her head. Her nose touched the back of his neck. She breathed in, and Ethan understood. She was smelling her cub on him. The hours he had spent holding the baby against his chest, warming it, keeping it alive, that scent had soaked into his skin, his hair, his clothes. He smelled like her child. The lioness made a sound Ethan had never heard before. Not a growl, not a roar. Something softer, something that vibrated through his entire body. Then she stepped back. She picked up her cub by the scruff of its neck, gently, carefully, the way mothers have carried babies for millions of years. She looked at Ethan one last time, and then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the wet grass of the Kalahari, her white cub dangling safely from her jaws. Ethan stayed on his knees for a long time. His whole body was shaking. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the rain that had started falling again. He was alive. He didn't understand why, but he was alive. 3 months later, Ethan was still at the research station. He had told no one about the white cub, no one about the lioness. Some experiences were too strange, too personal to share with scientists who would want to tag and track and study. Some experiences belonged only to the people who lived them. He was walking back to his shelter at dusk when he saw them. A lioness sitting in the tall grass 50 meters away. And beside her, a white cub, bigger now, almost adolescent, but still unmistakably the same animal he had pulled from the mud 3 months ago. Ethan froze. The lioness stood up. She began walking toward him. Every rational thought told Ethan to run, to get inside, to lock the door and hide. But something made him stay. The lioness stopped 10 feet away. Her cub, the white cub, bounded forward, closing the distance, and did something that made Ethan's heart stop. It rubbed against his legs, the way a house cat greets its owner, the way a dog welcomes someone home. The cub remembered him. Ethan knelt down slowly, carefully. The cub pressed its head against his hand, that same rumbling purr vibrating through its body. "Hey, little one," Ethan whispered. "Look at you, all grown up." The lioness watched. She didn't approach, didn't threaten, just watched her cub greet the human who had saved its life. Then she made that sound again, that soft, vibrating call that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a purr. A greeting, Ethan realized. She's greeting me. He looked at the lioness. She looked back at him. And in that moment, across the impossible distance between species, something passed between them. Not friendship. Lions don't have friends. Not gratitude. Lions don't feel gratitude the way humans understand it. But recognition. She knew him. She remembered what he had done, and she had brought her cub back to show him that it had survived. The lioness turned and walked back toward the tall grass. The white cub followed, pausing once to look back at Ethan with those pale blue eyes. Then they were gone. Ethan finished his research 6 months later. He published papers about meerkats. He gave lectures at universities. He built a career studying animals that would never try to kill him. But he kept one photograph that he never showed anyone. A white lion cub curled against a human chest, sleeping peacefully while a storm raged outside. He had taken it with his phone during those 2 hours in the dark when he wasn't sure either of them would survive. Sometimes, late at night, he would look at that photograph and remember the weight of the cub against his chest, the sound of its mother hitting the door, the moment he decided to open it anyway, the breath on the back of his neck, the recognition in a lioness's eyes. People asked Ethan sometimes why he had done it, why he had risked his life for a wild animal that would never thank him, never remember him, never care whether he lived or died. He never knew how to answer. The truth was too simple, too strange. He had looked into the eyes of a drowning cub and seen something that demanded action, not thought, not calculation, just action. And when its mother came to kill him, he had looked into her eyes and seen something else. A mother searching for her child, no different from any human mother, no different from any creature that has ever loved something small and helpless and vulnerable. In that moment,
Hey
they
there, little
weren't
one.
predator and prey.
Remember me?
They were just two beings who
Good to see you
understood the
again.
same thing. Some lives are worth risking everything for, and some debts are repaid in ways we never expect. The white cub was spotted 3 years later by a documentary crew, fully grown, leading her own pride in the northern Kalahari. She had survived, thrived, become something rare and magnificent. And somewhere in Texas, a man who once held her against his chest in a storm watched the documentary alone in his apartment, tears streaming down his face. He never told anyone why he was crying. Some bonds don't need witnesses. They just need to exist.